What is up, everybody? Man, I have just left y'all hanging. I'm so sorry. Last week was crazy busy, just packing and everything. Finals week. I had two big exams. One was the graduate entrance exam, the GRE, and then final exams for the semester. So, yeah, I'm so sorry, you guys. But I wanted to give you an episode because, that's what I do. And another update in my life. I know I told you guys that I was going to do some stand-up comedy. And man, it went so well, you guys. And I had a lot of laughs. I was very nervous at first. I thought that maybe I wasn't funny or my jokes weren't going to be funny enough. But man, we had an amazing crowd. A lot of people come out. I had some friends come out and support, and it was such an incredible time. So I know I'm going to be doing more of that in the future. So I'm just doing it all, I guess. Just gonna throw all the darts at the board and see what sticks. That's kind of been my motto. So I'm gonna give you another Christmas episode today. This one's gonna be a little bit different. I know in the past, I've done the psychology behind things, behind the holiday of Halloween. Well, today it's gonna be more about one of the famous Christmas stories, books, and it's also a movie as well that has been adapted several times. So, stay tuned for that. I am your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you are listening to What the Psychology. Alright, so in a previous episode we talked about Sigmund Freud, and I know that talking about famous psychologists can be kind of boring and redundant, but if you haven't listened to that one, go back because it's kind of important to know some of his discoveries. And today I'm going to talk about the famous book by Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol, which of course has been adopted into many different films and such. But I want you guys to know this story is incredible for the time that Dickens wrote it, because this was written 43 years before Sigmund Freud pretty much came onto the psychology scene and started to pioneer the field and come up with theories and ideas and more about our mind and psychology behind things. And so that's what just makes this story even more incredible. And we're going to break it down a little bit more. But there are many things that Dickens wrote in the story. There's a lot of character formation. There's a lot of confrontation with trauma and how those can affect us, and then healing process of mourning. And it's in a sense when the main character Scrooge is confronted by the three ghosts, in a sense it's kind of a form of therapy or a psychotherapy. And it's just incredible how the whole plot can be a part of a play on of our consciousness, right? About the stories and how it frames his character and it changes him. So it's just really incredible that Charles Dickens had the wisdom to write all of this into Scrooge's character. But I think it's even more incredible that he wrote this almost half a century before psychology even became a field. And in a sense, at the end, all of these things that Scrooge confronted, it was a transitional and transformal journey, and he found his real authentic being, his real authentic self. And in psychology, there's actually an approach called the humanistic approach, and it's more of finding your self-actualization. So they focus more on people's strengths and positivity and acceptance and working towards your own goals and working towards yourself and finding yourself and your true authentic self. And that theory came out, I wouldn't say way after Freud, but it was kind of one of the counter arguments to what Freud came up with. And like I said in the previous episode, a lot of other psychologists of the time did, because Freud, he did have some very weird theories, like his psychosexual development theory. Even to this day is completely rebuked, but you have to think even back in that day where it was even more so conservative, and those ideals were just insane. So, but we have to give the man credit where it is due. He was the only person to come up with such a thing at the time. And I guess he might have observed that from his own life or other people's lives and said, well, this is maybe a cause of it. However, we know that's not to be true, but because of his very controversial theories that are even controversial to this day, let alone back then, more psychologists came on the scene and were like, no, that don't sound right. This could be a possible theory. And I just think this story is incredible. It's probably one of my favorites because it really explores a depth of ourselves that I guess some of us can understand. Or even if we see people that are as bitter as Scrooge is, then we can really think, what is the causation of that? So we're going to dive in today and learn more about the story and different notes and different things about how it kind of plays on psychology a bit. Maybe Charles Dickens was like the original pioneer of psychology, even though he wasn't, but it's just incredible. And now it's like in hindsight, we kind of look at this and we're like, well, of course writers make character formations and plots and things like that. Yes, they do, because we can all agree to that. But for it to be such things that weren't even discovered yet or talked about yet, and for his mind to be so creative, and how it relates to even to this day, and goes along with other theories that were played on that weren't even discovered at the time, it's quite profound. Okay, so I'm going to go through the story quite a bit and read into how this relates to psychology and the development of Scrooge's character. So in this, there's the main character Scrooge, and he's this bitter old man. And this is how Dickens describes him in the book. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. So that's just a description of the character that we're talking about. And what happens is his old business partner, Marley, did pass away. And so on this Christmas Eve, his deceased partner, he appeared as an apparition warning to him that if he did not change his ways, he will have an afterlife of ongoing torment just like him. And it's kind of like a horror show in a sense, and it's very creepy and very, like, I don't know how else to describe it. Marley has, like, dirty gauge, ugliness, chains, moans creepily. He's in physical and emotional pain. So Marley was very similar to him. And so he came as a warning to show him that if he keeps living the way that he is living, he will be in the same place that he is in. So he then tells Scrooge that he has a chance to escape his own fate through the visitation of 3 Christmas ghosts.
Woohoo, ghost, yeah!
This is what this podcast. Yeah, we're into the darker side. So Scrooge, of course, does not really listen to him, and he just kind of dismisses it as just this is just a vision or a dream, and there's no importance there. And so he doesn't really care about the warning that he gets at all, but it does kind of worry him quite a bit. I mean, Scrooge is a character that is very set in his own ways, and he has been there for a long, long time. And it's like, why would he change? Is it even possible for him to reverse his hostile attitude, his judgmental attributes that he has towards others? And can he rejoin the humanity of people? Can he feel caring and not selfish? Can he reach out in a loving way instead of a narcissistic way of just trying to serve himself versus serving other people? So the first ghost was the ghost of Christmas past, and everything that Marley had prophesied came to be. So the ghost of Christmas past, he took Scrooge back to his old school when he was, I'm pretty sure, a child, and he finds himself alone. He was neglected by his friends, he was solitary, and around Christmas, all the other boys had gone home, and he was the only one left at school at Christmas time. And so he sits alone in a room and he's reading near a small fire, and in Dickens' words, he wept to see his poor forgotten self as he had used to be. And he wept again when there he was alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. So Ebenezer Scrooge, he was actually an abandoned child, and he was totally rejected by his father, sent off to school, and never invited back home again. But what is kind of weird is his younger sister remained home with the father. And so if you really think about this situation, how Scrooge must have been thinking that he wasn't loved and all of those type of things. So parental love and guidance is kind of the source of our inner sustenance. It nourishes us, serves as a foundation that carries us through the trials of life. And Scrooge was actually a very sweet little boy, but he became damaged by the deprivation of a home, of loving parents, social interactions. He was neglected, and it's quite often argued that neglect has the same effect on children that abuse does, because they're still being withheld from the things that they need. Yes, they need food, they need a roof over their heads, they need water, they need a bed, but they also need attributes that caregivers and parents are supposed to give them, which is unconditional love, acceptance, discipline, kindness, rules and regulations, guidance, etc. It does play on a big part of our development, more than what we like to give it credit for. And I know we've talked about in the past, especially when we went over Charles Manson, that his past, I mean, it's not the cause for who he is essentially. Like, we can't always blame things on that, because there's a lot of people that go through those issues that don't become mass murderers. That's a fact. However, it does kind of attribute to their character building and their feelings of themselves towards others. So it's kind of like a play on of a cause, but not fully, because people still make their own choices, right? So abuse and neglect do go a long way. They have a major effect on especially children. Now back to Scrooge. His sister actually did surprise him and arrived at his school to bring him home. And she begged her father once again to bring him home. And the father finally kind of agreed and allowed him to come home. And his sister said that he'll never come back to the school, and they'll all be together for Christmas, and they'll all be merry. And so the memory of his sister is what he associated with love. That's the only thing that he had really in his life. It wasn't his father. And in the stories, there's no mention of a mother, so we really don't know what happened to her. Did she die during childbirth? Did she leave the home? You know, what happened? More than likely, she probably died of some sorts. But by this time, it was a little bit too late for Scrooge. He was already abandoned. The pain that he had was writing his story. He had a lot of hurt, anger, no self-worth. And he had so much shame that developed into his character. So his sister did try to come and bring him back, but it's just, he already experienced the trauma of neglect. So I mean, I'm not going to say that you can't redeem people, because people can definitely be redeemed. but for the character of Scrooge, it's kind of late for him at that time. So the next scene was for the Ghost of Christmas Past, the Christmas Eve at the office of old Fezziwig. And that he was like an apprentice of the shop, and his mentor was kind, warm, generous, and loving. And he treated his employees like family. He was loved by everybody, including Ebenezer. And he actually rejoiced at the memories of the old Christmas party where he was a happy participant. So Scrooge had two models that he could have went off of. His father who abandoned him and Fezziwig. But because of the abandonment and the emotional deprivation that he experienced, he just rejected the model of his mentor. He just figured that he didn't really have a choice. He just felt so deeply bad and hurt. He could not accept that. For him, it was more of, well, that's 1 in a million. More people are like my father. So it really built in this eternal struggle within himself because he lacked that foundation of internal love and he was too angry. So this turned him bitter, and it teamed up, and then he teamed up with Marley, who was older than him, and the empty promises of gold and egotism became his false idols. He started to worship money. He would settle into his ways of hardness. He would be judgmental towards others, constantly angry, self-serving. He only cared about making money. Now, it turns out that the next loss was the final straw. So his beloved sister, she actually died in childbirth from the birth of his nephew. So Scrooge actually posted blame on his nephew for her death. Which, I mean, we all know it's not really the baby's fault. Especially back in this time, it was just the lack of medical. And nowadays we have the resources to intervene and prevent things and all of that, even though there is that risk, but, you know, I digress. This is the same nephew who time and time again at Christmas every year, he invites him over to have dinner, and he was rejected by the famous bah humbug phrase, right? We always hear that with Scrooge rejecting him, bah humbug, you know. And in the context of the Christmas past, his old self began to remember about real giving. When he was mourning the pain of his sister's death and the memories that he was seeing, he started to soften up a little bit. He acknowledged and genuinely regretted not being kind to his clerk, Bod Cratchit, which is Tiny Tim's father. And we'll go into a little bit about who those characters are, too. And, yeah, let's keep it on Scrooge for a little bit. So, these experiences, these things that the Christmas past ghost is showing him is really starting to crystallize his character. Another memory that he showed him was Scrooge was actually engaged, and Scrooge was just so set in his ways that she pretty much left him. She said in the book, "Another idol has displaced me, a golden one. You are changed. When your vow was made, you were an other man, so I release you, with a full heart for the love of him you once were." So she realized that the old Ebenezer was gone. His character was just not who he was when she met him. He could not recognize that she loved him, and he couldn't really love her, and it was pretty much too late for him. And because of her leaving, he just really played into now the story of hardness, cruelty, and the inability to love. No, I guess there's no saying if she would have stuck around, would he not have changed? Who knows? Because it seemed that he was pretty happy with her, but he wanted money. He wanted the business to be successful, and that's even if he did love her, that's what he put first. He wanted to be successful. He wanted money. So with the Ghost of Christmas Past, he did visit his ex-fiancée and her family, and that's when he started to realize that he missed out on love, being a father with a happy home. He saw that he would die all alone, kind of like Marley did. And then he set eyes on his ex-fiancée's daughter, and He thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father. And so that brought out regret and pain. So Scrooge was very affected by his past and the choices that he made. He wept and mourned over them. He began to feel real genuine and regret for these decisions, and that he sold himself short of love and instead had a hardening of heart. He was regretful that he was mean and that he lost all the pleasures of the life and that he once had. He missed out on warmth, comfort. He could have had a family, could have had children, and now he's just kind of evaluating himself as lost and empty. He was really starting to think about the trauma that he experienced and how he kind of shut himself out from the world. So the Christmas past really just brought out this side of him of, I didn't make the best choices. I sell myself short of the things that I really should have experienced. So next comes in the Ghost of Christmas Present. This is the second ghost. They also appeared on early Christmas morning. And this is what's going on in the current time. He went to visit many people's houses. He went to Tiny Tim's house, which is his clerk's son. He went to his nephews and many of the poor and benefit homes throughout the world. So you can see in these that there's Christmas joy and giving in all of them, which is in contrast to his life of being alone, joyless, and misery. So one note about psychotherapy. It's not only about mourning and facing trauma in the past, but it's also kind of looking at our current state of mind. We look at our current relationships in our present life. We look at how we are behaving and what is affecting us to how we are portraying ourselves. So in this sense, we kind of need to mourn the pain that give and receive in the present. Like, what is causing our present to be the way that it is? So we kind of have to face the past before the present. And facing the truth is in a way of sets us free. At least that is kind of like the goal in psychotherapy. Now, as Scrooge starts to feel, he begins to start to care about Tiny Tim, and he learns that he will die. The ghost quotes Scrooge from his earlier disposition, where I believe he is confronted about somebody about donating money to like a cause. And this is what he says. If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population. And I believe it was like something about giving money to the poor. And that was pretty much like his response. I could be wrong about that, but from what I remember from reading and watching different movies, that's kind of what I recall. But what is really crazy about this story is his assistant, his clerk, Bob Cratchit. He's the one that is always there with a smile on his face. He never complains. He does not criticize Scrooge. And Scrooge is watching what is going on. And even at Christmas, I mean, his family is so poor. And this is kind of because of Scrooge, because Scrooge is his employer and he doesn't pay him much. But they wear threadbare clothes. They make to do with a tiny Christmas goose. And he has such a devotion to his family and Tiny Tim. And it shows Scrooge a richness he never dreamed of. It's really putting family before money and love before money. In this, it shows that Cratchit suffers the unbearable pain of Tiny Tim's death, the loss of his cherished child, because he couldn't afford medical care. Yet he is still takes the blow with such a grace and a generosity of feeling for others. And it's quite the opposite of Scrooge. Like, his response to trauma versus Scrooge's response to trauma is completely different. Instead of being filled with bitterness and rejection and blame, he mourns, but he still is gracious and generous and kind to others. So then the next visitation is to Scrooge's nephew's house. This is the one that his sister, that Scrooge's only source of love, gave childbirth to him and died. So Scrooge sees that he is viewed as like the ugly, nasty, mean ogre of the family. But even his nephew still loves him, and Scrooge had cut him off in anger, in his unforgiving anger for his sister's death. But his niece looked exactly like Scrooge's sister and kind of awakened the memories of the feelings that he had for her, the loving nature of her. And even watching this, he wanted to participate in the celebrations, the loving games, so he recently considered humbug. So I'm guessing, I never understood what humbug means, but I'm kind of starting to gain an understanding. I'm guessing humbug is this coming together and celebrating, spending time with family and games. So when he said humbug, he was pretty much rejecting that notion of spending time with family. Okay, so the last showcase for the ghost of the Christmas present, he has to confront the two evils of the world. So there are two gaunt, neglected, and starved children under the robes of the ghost of Christmas present. The girl is want, and the boy is ignorance. Most of all, the boy represents his own doom. The ghost again quotes Scrooge's old-heartedless attitude. "Are there no prisons?" said the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words. "Are there no workhouses?" So starvation is not just real, it's also a metaphor of the absence of loving nourishment and family and parents. And it's really important to know that Scrooge did not live well off of his wealth at all. He continued to eat gruel in the dungeon of his rundown home. He pretty much hoarded his money. He accumulated gold, but he deprived others of it. He kind of had the attitude of, they can't have it, but I will. But he didn't actually enjoy the money or spend it. He lived in a dark, empty, and unhappy, mean life. He just didn't want others to have it. That was kind of like his entire purpose of, I'm successful, I do what I want with my money, and no one else can have it. Which in a sense is selfish, but in a sense I can also understand that if you work hard for the things you have, it's yours. But the whole thing with Scrooge is he didn't even spend it. He just kept it for nothing. He just wanted others to not have it. He didn't even splurge money on himself, buy a new house, nothing. He just simply wanted it so others couldn't have it. He coveted money. Alright, so the final ghost to confront Scrooge, it depicted Scrooge's future. And, I mean, no one can really predict the specifics of the future for sure, but in a sense, the future can be predictable. His character always plays true unless it is mourned and dealt with. Wisdom understands that character is destiny. And of course, Dickens understood this as well. The Ghost of Christmas future showed that Scrooge died, but no one came to mourn Scrooge's death. 3 low-life robbers stole his belongings and sold them to some bottom-of-the-barrel broker. He does not yet know that the loathsome man who died was him. So this whole thing is depicted. He died, and he's being shown all of this and seeing the reaction, and what he says was, if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice, hard dealing, griping cares, they have brought him to a rich end truly. If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show me that person, spirit, I beseech you. Which is crazy because he's being shown all of this and he don't know it's him. Like, this is your future, man. You're gonna die and this is how people react. They don't even warn you. But now the upshot of play on to psychotherapy is kind of this. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if preserved in, they must lead, which is said by Scrooge. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Says it is thus with what you show me. So finally, in desperation, Scrooge begs him to show him who this person is. Assure me that I yet may change the shadows you have shown me by an altered life. The kind hand trembled. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive with me. I will not shut out the lessons that they taught me. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on the stone. So this is kind of when he realizes that it is him who is the dead man. That this is his future. That he will die in bitterness. No one will visit him. He will be stolen from and his belongings will be sold for the least amount of cash. Like, he's dispensable. So the spirits, they kind of bring him back to the land of the living. And so the whole confrontation with all of these ghosts, it worked. It was like a form of psychotherapy. Scrooge, he recovers and mourns the loss, and he starts to become his more authentic self. So he goes from joyless, judgmental, hateful, and then now he is sweet and innocent, kind of like the boy he actually always was, but he couldn't be. So he feels all of these emotions of everything he just experienced. He laughs, he cries, he feels, he cares, he loves, he gives. And his laughter is almost embarrassing because the lightness of his being is so new. He has pretty much come back from the dead. If you think about it, like, he was shown that this is going to be your future. And I guess it's a really good place for us to pause and think. The question of, when I die, what will I be remembered for? I want you guys to think about that for a moment. Will people mourn your loss? Will they recount funny stories of you? Will they be embarrassing? Will they be good work that you did for others? But for Scrooge, it wasn't like that at all. No one even came. No one mourned his loss. It was kind of like, well, another one bites the dust, right? So he makes up for lost time. He starts to. Another note I want to think about in this story is you have to imagine that everyone that saw this man day in and day out saw his bitterness, his ugliness, and he just pushed others away. And now he's completely transformed and he's about to kind of go out into the town and see people and do things that he's never really done. So I just want to think of how everyone else must have gave him a side eye of what is going on with this dude. Like, something must have really happened for him to be so transformed. So one of the first things he actually did, he got a sum of money. I guess, I don't know, they probably didn't have banks back then, but he got a large sum of money and he gave it to the men that earlier confronted him about wanting him to help with the poor. So he actually found them and gave them a huge amount of money and said, you know, God bless you, Merry Christmas. Please use this for the poor. Please help them out. And then his assistant, Bob Cratchit, he actually bought them the biggest goose in town. And he plays a joke on him and he pretended that he was mad that he came late into work. So I guess what happened was he told his assistant that he still has to come to work on Christmas and that he would be allowed to like leave early. But instead, when Bob shows up to work and he's late, he pretty much plays this joke on him that he's still this bitter old man and that he's mad at him for coming in late. And then he said that he was going to have to change his pay, right? But instead, he tells him he's going to raise his salary. And then he ended the joke quickly because he didn't really want him to suffer. And he had not played a joke in decades, which is crazy. So he pretty much supplied Bob with all of the medical funds to fully cover his son, Tiny Tim. And I'm sorry, I'm getting chills right now thinking about this story. The money that he gave was... it pretty much allowed Tiny Tim to live, thrive, and walk again. And even though it was kind of too late for Scrooge to have kids, he pretty much became a second father to Tiny Tim, and he pretty much started to love him as his own. Even though Scrooge knew, and I think we can all realize that we cannot undo our past, and we certainly can't go back and change mistakes we might have made, we can project what we do in the present and sort of how we will act in the future. We can always live and love right now. So I want to kind of dissect that a little bit. I think that's so funny. He had not joked in decades and he kind of pulls a fast one. He secretly buys the biggest goose in town for the family and then he he realizes that the pain of Tiny Tim and his assistant Bob Cratchit is because of him, because he doesn't really pay a good wage. And that's why they're poor. And you have to think that Bob Cratchit this whole time never complained. He worked hard with this bitter old man and still tried to put a smile on his face, do what he was said, and still loved and cared for his family. And then this complete 180, Scrooge just gives him what he needs. I just think that's incredible. And then he starts to love Tiny Tim as his own. He starts to grow this attachment. So kind of the next thing that Scrooge does that is a complete 180 to what his character was, is he starts to forgive his nephew and he reunites with his family. So he joins them in celebrating Christmas, and he has a bunch of cheer and kindness, and he gets to be with his niece, who looks exactly like his deceased sister, which is her mother. So he actually laughs and joins in the games and fun, and it kind of recounts the memory of his childhood when he did have those good memories. So now he is participating fully in life, and he leaves the world of the walking dead. His old life was empty, and now he is alive. Man, that's just crazy how all of this could be changed, right? So Scrooge's character, it was forged from his own emotional pain. And of course, we can change the course of our own lives when we face and we mourn that pain. Now, that's what some people say, and everyone's different with their own theories. No matter what, people do have to face things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the way of us talking about them with someone or reliving it. But sometimes we kind of need to really sit down and think and mourn from things and not necessarily move on from them, but learn from them. I'm trying to say that as sensitively as possible, because we are the ones that are in charge of our own lives. We are the only ones that can let things affect us or not. That person that might have bullied you in the past, they have no say now. Even though that caused a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, we cannot let that person have so much effect on our lives now. And even though it subconsciously kind of does, we have to learn from that. We grow confident. And sometimes in a way that's kind of thinking of, well, they must have felt that about themselves if they were to project it on someone else. No, we know that want, deprivation, cruelty, power, money, those can create the evils of the world. Mourning and trust are kind of like, well, let me say it this way. Mourning and trust, when they are in the context of love, they are the antidotes. They are what combats the evils and the cruelties of this world. And I really think this story is so powerful because although it's a Christmas type story and kind of a Christmas miracle, it really is a way that we have to kind of confront ourselves in a way. And Dickens, he teaches us that we have to rediscover this truth over and over again. And he does it in a safe way with a different character of Scrooge. Although we may not be as bad or as deprived or as mean or cruel as Scrooge was, we know that there are parts of us that can be that way. And I know I do. We can all admit to that, right? It's not just, none of us are perfect. And I really think that through the character of Scrooge, Dickens really helps us kind of find our way to that. And that's why I think that this book, anybody can read it. We can all relate to it. We can all understand it. He uses one big extreme of a character transforming into the complete opposite. And it's kind of a way that we can watch and see that there is a renewal of the human spirit. There's a renewal of hope, of love, of kindness, of generosity. And honestly, I think that that's what the Christmas spirit in itself is all about. Now, we can get really religious with this, and you guys know I'm a religious person. But even in the context of religion, if we take Christmas as what it is, what Christians believe as Jesus coming to die on the cross and forgiving our sins, well, Christmas marks his birth and coming into the world to do all of those things. And with his footprint on the earth, he was still kind to others, caring. He healed people. There were miracles. All of these things. And even that spirit of things in that context, it's still the spirit of giving, of loving, of kindness, of generosity, taking your cloak off and giving it to someone else, healing people with words, being kind, reaching out your hand to them. And although there are things in this world that are good to have, like money, we kind of have to have money to live these days, it's not the most important thing. In a sense of what is missing from our world and in our current political climate is you have people wishing death on others just for believing differently than them. Or, as I've seen, people will just completely avoid people with different opinions, or they will delete them, or even you'll have friends that have been friends for 20 years and then one supports one president and the other hates the president, so now they hate the friend and they just delete them. Like, I've seen that many times, and it's like, why are you going to let that destroy your friendship that you've had for 20 years? Why don't you actually talk to them and figure out why they voted for whoever and what their ideas are? Like, it really frustrates me to see the loss of humanity in our world. And I mean, I try to really gain friends from all perspectives. I try to have friends that believe differently than me, whether they are Christian or not. I try to get friends of different colors, different cultures, different backgrounds, different countries. And I just feel like there's such a loss of humanity in our world today. So what I'm going to leave you off with this is Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Holidays. Regardless of what you believe, regardless the shade of your melanin, your skin, regardless of your culture background, your religion, your traditions, this is a time for us to reflect. For us to reflect on ourselves. Do we have trauma in the past? Do we need to work through it? Do we need to talk through it? Do we need to see a therapist? Or do we just need to talk our way through of how we can be a better, kind human race? Because at the end of the day, we're all the same species. We all have the same blood color. We may have different blood types, but you know. You get what I'm saying. We're all in this world together, and we're all living. We're all striving for the same things. We all work. Well, most of us, we work. We all want a good life for ourselves. We want families. We have goals, prosperities, things in our life that are important to us. And why don't we look at the similarities and even the differences, and instead of them dividing us, why don't we use those to unite us and come together, especially in this time of the year? I will say happy 2021. I will see you guys next year in 2022. Merry Christmas to you all, and to you all a good night. I am your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you've been listening to What the Psychology.
Stay psycho!
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. And a Happy New Year.